because internet governance is so, loaded, and it has been so heavily debated from a human rights perspective and principles perspective, which have been shaping the governance debates in the last years, and the fact that there was Net Mundial last year, for example, where, for example, the net neutrality paragraph, was finally not being able to, there was no consensus among the community to impose a net neutrality statement in the Net Mundial. As you're very much aware, zero rating is part of the debate of net neutrality, and so it is highly contentious, and I'm very glad to hear that the OECD, which has a strong evidence-based tradition of making research, and it's finding it very difficult to say, okay, this is good for one market or for one sector and bad for another. It's a very complex policy solution. Which, as Verena also stated, it's in the case of the United States, we're seeing that there's no definite ruling or regulatory perspective, and it will be examined on a case-to-case basis. But having said that, if we look at the original design principles of the internet, and here openness is openness end-to-end, and some say that the neutrality has or had been an original design principle by the internet architecture fathers, we find that the idea of openness is very much challenged by zero rating. From a principle perspective, but it's a policy that is really attacking that principle, because it's very difficult to find in the menus that we're seeing of zero rating these days, policies that are actually keeping up with this idea of openness, particularly at the infrastructure level, but particularly at the content level, where we see that there is much more tension there. So this very basic principle of the internet architecture of openness is actually very much challenged by zero rating practices, and we don't yet have definite and conclusive results as to whether that is hampering innovation and entrepreneurs. But once again, one of the ideas of the internet is that it is a permissionless technology. So the idea that one has to seek permission from someone or somebody to upload their content in a certain way, or to make it available for others, so I'm specifically here talking about content, is something that is a bit of a challenge to what we have been debating and experiencing around the internet governance debates in the past years. Connecting it with the other idea of freedom of expression these days is very much, it's a human right that is inextricably related with privacy. And many of these services that are offered in zero-rated services or packages are driven by the fact of free apps that work with the data of citizens or consumers, as you would like to think of the person at the other side of the device using this. So we know that in many cases, in many countries, many of these applications and technologies are very liberating, and in some cases where there's no democracy, these platforms open up a space for debate, political debate and social mobilization that is very strong. But we also have to bear in mind that many of these platforms, and for example in Facebook, you have to use your real name. So there's a privacy concern, which is directly related with the issue of freedom of expression, because we don't know what the data is. It's a blank check to what the application providers are doing at the other side. So freedom of expression and privacy these days should be very much thought together, particularly in the case of zero-rated services, and particularly because the perspective of how these business models are developing around internet services, content services around data and our data is being challenged by new perspectives that we have heard in this IGF recently, and how we should start thinking of new business models where data is taken up in a more ethical manner, but by corporations. I mean, and once again, and it's interesting to see that the Dutch government has this very specific perspective on a zero rating, which they are banning it, but they also in the stand, and it's very public, I mean, they are also promoting privacy as a basic right in the internet world. So I think that, I mean, I've tried to provide a bit of some of the tensions regarding the main principles that are underlying some of these services and policies and the packages around the different kinds of conceptions that we have around zero rating, and how that is affecting not just the internet governance debate, but I think this should be key considerations for policymakers, because although we still don't have the evidence, they are looking at it from a principle-based view, they are in somewhat of a tension or a contradiction with many of these. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolina. You stressed the impact of zero rating on freedom of expression. Maybe afterwards we have here expert on public law, and they can also, stress the issue and try to develop the question. Now we move on the socio-economic impact, which was one of our main target, and I give the floor to a very well-known expert in that issue, studied a lot on the impact of internet, and he has a deep knowledge of all these kind of relations between zero rating, net neutrality, zero rating, and internet on the economic development. It's Hernan Galperin, so please take the floor.
Thank you, Antonio. I was coming on the bus this morning, and some of my fellow colleagues in the bus were asking, so what you coming? I said, I'm coming on a panel on zero rating. I said, another panel on zero rating, is this possible? And I said, yes, it's possible, but I'd like to bring something different to the debate. Obviously, there's been many panels and presentations on this. But I'd like to bring a slightly different perspective, which is a more empirical perspective and evidence about what's happening with zero rating in Latin America. So I'm going to try to avoid talking principles and rights and so on, and talk about data. And the data comes from the work of DIRCI. DIRCI is a research network of ICT policy in Latin America, of which I'm director. And in DIRCI, we've been doing for many years two things. We've been collecting supply-side data on the broadband markets, and we've been collecting household surveys on ICT use in the region. So let me introduce both sides. On supply-side data, what we do is every year, or once a year, every year, we go out and collect all the plans for all the operators for fixed and mobile throughout all the countries in the region. We use the OECD methodology, in fact, to do that. So we have a very large database of all the plans that both mobile and fixed operators have. And we've been doing this for several years. And this is a good place to start the debate, because what we see is that clearly zero rating is the new iteration of a process in which both mobile and fixed operators have been segmenting the market farther and farther. We've started with fairly plain vanilla broadband plans for fixed and mobile, particularly mobile. We started seeing a segmentation by data cap, and then by duration, payment modality, and the new one is service segmentation. Of course, when you segment by service, you introduce a whole layer of complexity which may not be present in the other variables for segmenting the market. So let me give you the few results of the survey for this year. First of all, zero rating is present in every market in Latin America. That means at least one operator in every market in Latin America is doing some form of zero rating. So the debate is clearly relevant. Now, it varies by country. In some countries, only one operator is doing it, and this is typically the smallest, the challenger operator. Some countries, 2 operators are doing it. In some countries, 3 operators are doing it. That basically means all the operators are doing it. But it's typically the challenger that is doing more aggressively zero rating. And this is interesting because in Latin America, we have the market is essentially dominated by 2 large companies, but in different markets, the companies play different roles. For example, in Mexico, where Telefónica is the challenger, is doing more aggressive zero rating. Now, in other countries where Telefónica is incumbent and Telmex or Claro is a challenger, then Claro is doing more aggressive zero rating. So clearly is a challenger strategy in those markets. Looking operators, so if you aggregate the operators by country, so we're double counting Telefónica and Claro around the region. We have about 45 operators, and about half of them are doing some form of zero rating. And the typical modality is a sweetener to a data package. So in fact, we found that the internet.org model, where you don't have to buy a data package and you simply have zero rating services as part of your basic voice services, is fairly rare. In fact, in Latin America, we only found internet.org in 3 countries, and I believe even in Paraguay, which had internet.org, I'm sorry, Free Basics, I believe it's called now. It was discontinued, it was a temporary promotion. So at least from the point of view of supply, those kinds of zero rating offers are fairly marginal. The typical one is carrier initiated and is a sweetener on top of a specific number of mega or gigagigs that is offered to the customer. Which services are most commonly zero rated? Well, by far Facebook is the leading service that is zero rated. Again, not counting internet.org, the carrier initiated zero rating services, by far the most zero rated service is Facebook by far. So this is 20 out of 22 operators that do zero rating, they zero rate Facebook. The second one is WhatsApp, it's another property, and 14 operators zero rate WhatsApp, and then 14 also zero rate Twitter. Now there are other services being zero rated, but clearly down the line, MySpace is zero rated by 4 operators, High5, Instagram. So there's other services being zero rated by other operators. There's messenger services, email services, but those tends to be fairly marginal. The biggest package by far is the Facebook, WhatsApp, and Twitter package. Now, going to the demand side. It's important to talk about demand because zero rated is being presented as a way to bring more people online, people who cannot afford services, who think they're not relevant. So let's examine this question. How many people really can afford services? How many people are not interested in services, and can zero rated services help us bring these people online? Fortunately, we have a lot of data in Latin America. The Statistics Office, the regulators have been collecting ICT data on users and non-users for a while, so we know quite a bit about the characteristics and the preferences. So I recently put together all the recent household surveys in one big data set, which allows us to compare across countries. Methodologies and sample sizes are not exactly the same, but these are the largest household surveys nationally representative in Latin America. So this is a work in progress, but I'm going to give you a few highlights. One thing that's been said is availability of services is not an issue in Latin America, and the data clearly confirms that. First of all, when you ask people why you do not subscribe to a service, very few people say because service is not available in my area. Very few people, 5% on average. So very few people. Of course, when you start playing with the data, and especially when you look at rural areas, it increases, but increases, I mean, the effect of rural on this answer is it becomes twice as large. But so the marginal effect is high, but still you go from 5 to 10%. So still, even in rural areas, you have a fairly small amount of people who are saying the main reason is I can't access, there is no service in this area. So there's clearly what we call a demand gap. So if it's not availability, there's a gap in demand. There's services available, but for some reason people are not buying them. So why are people not buying them? So here's what we do. The surveys vary in terms of how they ask these questions, but we essentially divide the answers in 4 categories. One category of answers is affordability. Everybody that says something like, I can't pay it, it's too costly, and so on. The second is, I'm not interested, I don't need it, so it's an interest question. Third one is skills, I don't know how to use it, or answers of the sort. And the fourth is availability, which I just referred to. So first, the surveys ask people why you are not a subscriber to a broadband service, either fixed or mobile, why you don't have a broadband subscription. And here, cost clearly appears to be still the main barrier. It varies by country. As an average, between 40 and 60% of the people say affordability is the main barrier, and of course varies by demographic. And the second one is interest. So below cost is interest, which is about between 18 and 30% depending on the country. And if you look at it in terms of the income distribution, the lines are crossing. Of course, cost starts very high in the income distribution, interest starts low, and then they start going in opposite direction. And it's interesting to see in every country where the lines of interest and cost converge. For example, in Uruguay, they converge around the 3rd income decile, which is a typical pattern in OECD countries, which is only the very poor say, I can't pay it, then you start really talking about interest and skills. This is what happened in Uruguay, because of course it's one of the richest countries in the region. But when you look at Mexico and Colombia, the lines cross really around the 7th, 8th, or even the 9th income decile. So clearly, even within middle class and over households, you still have cost issues that are creating connectivity barriers. Now, this is when you ask people why you don't have a subscription. Now, a different question is, are you an internet user, yes or no? And for those who say no, why you don't use it? So here, clearly, the situation is different. Cost plays a marginal role in explaining non-use. Basically, very few people, when you ask them why you don't use the internet, or why have you not used the internet in the last 6 months or 12 months, and there's some variety there. But the common, the cost answer is marginal. Very, very few people say, I am not a user because I can't pay for it. And here, what happens is a distribution about half between interest and skills. Though my initial hypothesis is that there's an underreporting of skills problem. I think more people have skills barriers that are, on a survey context, not really reporting, and I think we need better survey tools to measure, not to measure skills self-reported, but to really try to measure in some way ICT skills, because I think there's underreporting here. I'm running out of time, so there's a lot more findings, but I want to conclude with what I think what are the implications of these findings for zero rating. And I think they really depend on how the offers of zero rating are structured. When you offer zero rating on top of data packs, what you're clearly addressing is the cost barrier. What you're clearly addressing is you're segmenting the market and you're offering lower cost services to people who are already interested in the service because they're buying a data package, but you're adding more on top of the data package. Now, the zero rated of the free basics types those are addressed in the interest question. And because they don't require you to buy a data package, they say, well, you're already buying voice and basic services. Here's a little more that you can do. So those are addressing the interest question. I think this is interesting because we know from research that the internet tends to be what we call a good experience, or experience good, I'm sorry. It's also a good experience, but it's called experience good, which means you don't really know the value of it until you actually try it. So this is an interesting way to demonstrate the value of the internet to the users. And finally, I think regulators have a real tough dilemma, and there's clearly trade-offs here to make. From the data that I presented, I think you could think of this in terms of two types of errors. You can err on the side of ex-ante regulation and foreclosing some of the commercial innovation in the name of net neutrality and competition principles and so on. And you can err on the type 2 error, where you can err on the side of letting this innovation happen and maybe foreclose down the line competitive entry of new players. And from the data that we have, I think it's right now is best to err on the side of type 2, basically. Let the market evolve, see how the offers are structured, and keep an eye on monitor the impact and also the market structure, but without foreclosing this innovation that is clearly introducing the internet to a lot of people in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Hernan. I think that your presentation was very, very interesting. You stressed really the importance of and the role of zero rating, and it raised a lot of questions, and I hope that our audience, you will interact with in the debate. This is your evaluations, the evidence you provide us are very important in stimulating a debate, and also to think about the role of zero rating in the economic context. Now I would like to give the floor to Ricardo Pedraza Barrios. He represents Colombia here. The Colombian authority was one of the promoters of this workshop, and so we would like to have both his experience as expert, as businessman, I think, as consultant, and also if he made the view of a very important regulator in the region.
Thank you so much, Antonio. Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning to everyone. Let me share with you the government perspective on this issue, keeping in mind the effect really this kind of zero rating practices is having on the social and economic development in a country like Colombia. In 2010, Colombian government set an objective to reduce poverty and creating jobs through the use of ICTs. And I want to share with you and to give us this social context, a video on the scope and results achieved so far. Please.
Since 2010, Colombia lives a digital revolution connecting thousands of children, teachers, entrepreneurs, industrials, public officials, impaired persons, and small businesses. To achieve this, we set ourselves clear objectives and we strive every day to meet 93 goals in a digital ecosystem that includes, as a whole, infrastructure, users, applications, and services. When we started this project, only 200 municipalities had broadband internet. But thanks to the government of President Santos, we have connected 1,078 municipalities to the national network of fiber optics. Gradually, this revolution has connected the most remote areas of the country, such as the Amazon, the Orinoquia, and Chocó. This, thanks to the high-speed network and the microwave technology, which represents not only a step forward in technology, but also the hope and the certainty of a future with better opportunities. Also, in 2010, there were only 2 million internet subscribers. Today, in 2015, that number reaches more than 10 million, representing a large majority of the Colombian people. We went from 7% to 74% of small and medium businesses connected, opening the door to endless possibilities for growth and development in the country. In the case of the Colombian people, we had no means to learn to use the internet. We installed 899 Vive Digital points located in urban areas and 7,621 Vive Digital kiosks in remote areas, facilitating internet access to the farmers from their villages and townships, giving them the opportunity to expand their horizons beyond the rivers and mountains. We've opened the door to a digital world which was unimaginable to them. This digital revolution has been designed as an opportunity to guarantee equality for all. That is why more than 2 million families from socioeconomic strata 1 and 2 receives government subsidies to benefit from more affordable internet services or to buy a computer. In Colombia, visually impaired people can go to the cinema, and hearing impaired can talk on the phone. Small things for a lot of us, but a big step forward for these communities. We believe that when a child or adult has the opportunity and means to learn, we can create a better country, which is why education has always been one of our top priorities. In Colombia, public schools all around the country, thousands of students and teachers have received almost 2 million terminals to achieve a more complete and actualized education for them to exploit all their capacities using digital tools. In e-government, we are consolidated as the first country in Latin America and the 12th in the world in open data. Nowadays, in Colombia, we have more than 2,300 online transactions. This revolution has also reached companies and businesses. From the beginning of the Vive Digital Plan, we've created the biggest entrepreneur network of Latin America, with more than 76,000 Colombian people creating applications thanks to the support of Apps.co initiative. That is why the Vive Digital Plan has been awarded by more than 100 national and international prizes, such as Government Leadership from the GSMA in Barcelona as the best ICT policy worldwide. But more than a recognition of our programs, these achievements are a thanks for the smiles of each Colombian people benefited with technology, of each step to the construction of a better Colombia with better opportunities. All of this so that together we allow us to continue to build a better country. Today, Colombia lives digital, and its commitment from the government led by the President Santos to massify the internet use as a wonderful tool to reduce poverty, create jobs, and reach peace. This is the story of a connected country that is improving the lives of Colombians through technology.
Thank you. But at the same time, at the beginning of the plan you have just watched, the Colombian government introduced a law to promote efficient delivery of services, content, and applications, and to ensure free and fair competition. several rules follow it, and we adopt some net neutrality rules, and we were the second country in Latin America to do it, just after Chile. We consider that this type of rules set a common understanding for assuming an open internet. As we have realized through the implementation of the Vivid Digital Plan, and how it, and at the same time, it has been mentioned in the main session about policy options for connecting the next billion, we're still seeing a lot of people that need to be connected. As Professor Hernan mentioned before, in Latin America, there is still a great portion of the population not connected. And some of the research we have done and we have here is that what is incredible is there's still people that don't see the value of being connected. And that's something that we want to target and want to ensure that that opportunity is clear for the people who haven't here or being connected. So that's not the only reason. Sometimes you find there's a gap generation, there's a lack of trust on the internet, and there's a lack of affordability. So what the Colombian government has been trying to do, besides what you have seen on the video, is to try to encourage the parties involved in finding new ways to connect the rest of our population. And the reason is we have seen and we are seeing the social benefits and how this has changed the life of many people. So when we try to understand the zero rating initiative, we have to consider different aspects, and what we want to bring here to this panel is the context related to a policy strategy of the government to bring not just only connected people, but to give them the opportunity to learn what opportunities are behind, to give them the tools and all the different elements to become more productive, that they have the chance to speak more freely, open in a different way. So that was when Internet.org was introduced in the beginning of this year by a private initiative, offering a set of free services ranging from agriculture, health, e-government, and some of the apps that were mentioned in the video were introduced in this part of the offering. So far, let me share with you some of the results we have been achieving. 40% of the people that have used this kind of free trial of internet have, after 30 days, adopt an internet plan. So for us, for the government, that's the kind of objective, the kind of behavior we want to reach, is that the people who are not interested, who have not seen so far the value of getting internet, they have the potential of seeing some specific tools that could help them in their rural or in their normal day on how to become more productive, how to improve their own lives. And in a way that we have seen that 40% is getting connected to the internet, that is a good result in terms of our thesis that the use of ICT could improve the social life and the economic life of many people. Still, the government is focused on facilitating the use of ICT to cope with the critical issues of reducing poverty and creating jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo, for the experience you provide us from Colombia, which is also leading the Regulatal, the organization of the regulators in Latin America. I would like now to give the floor to Lorenzo Pupillo. Lorenzo will provide us the view of an important telecom, a very important telecom operator. The strategy, he is a strategy man, so he will provide us a view on this and how a very important operator react in front of zero rating and the other perspectives linked to it.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, so many things have been already said. So what I will try to do, I will start saying that, to my opinion, to our opinion, to some extent, in the majority of cases, that because we have learned yesterday and today there are so many different zero rating schemes, and so things cannot be generalized. But we can say that the majority of cases, why zero rating is not in contrast with net neutrality principle, because in the majority of cases there are no traffic management issues at stake, but zero rating is basically only a price differentiation at the retail level that has different purposes to increase adoption of service, to increase adoption on the network. It's basically a price differentiation strategies. Now, why is important this price differentiation? Price differentiation is important because, you know, sometimes we think of internet like it was like 10, 15 years ago, but internet today is a completely different thing, you know. It's much more heterogeneous, dynamics, and the information technology market that are based on internet have some basic characteristics that rely, the economics itself require the need of differentiation strategy at different level. What are these characteristics? Basically, this market, the IT market, are much more dynamic, are modular, and they are characterized by demand-side effect. Dynamics means that innovation is not an option, but it becomes the basic to be on the market. In other words, let's make this example that was done, was discussed also yesterday in the big session. Why? I mean, if T-Mobile in the US, you know, because cannot differentiate itself in terms of pricing, of quality of services, you know, try to differentiate itself in using, you know, a new the video offer. So it's the fourth operator. So it becomes, the using of this scheme becomes a competitive move, you know, for them to try to differentiate themselves. Modularity. Modularity is important because these services are very complementary. There are PC and software. And so it's important to allow this complementarity to work. But probably one of the most interesting issues is this demand-side effect that characterizes this market. In other words, the value in its network grow with the number of customers that join this network. So it's clear that zero rating allows to increase the base of customers and give more value to this network. Now, we have to consider, are these practices anti-competitive, and what are the effects on freedom of expression? Well, we should be against, very clear on that. Zero rating basically are or carrier initiated, or maybe they are based on sponsored data scheme. The carrier initiated, when there is a carrier initiated, the content is zero rated. The content provided, the Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, do not pay anything to the network operator, okay? If we use a sponsored data scheme, this sponsored data arrangement are available to everybody, okay? So there is no really foreclosure of the market. Now some people say, but there are victims of zero rating as small innovative content provider. Well, we have to say that it's in the interest of the operator, because they won't have, because as I said before, internet today is much more heterogeneous. It's not just a bunch of techie or professor academics, that are on the internet. As a billion of people, there are young people, women, all kind of potential users. So it's in interest of the operator to have a strong diversity of content provided as complementary to the network provisioning of services. There are instead small content providers that are engaged in zero rating, like Acuto, HipCricket, and Syntonic. When we come to zero rating and freedom of expression, again, we have to say zero rating programs do not generally involve exclusivity. So there are different views that are zero rated. Second, the companies engaged in zero rating to some significant extent, like Facebook, Twitter, Wikipedia, I don't think that you can say that our companies are against the freedom of expression. Of course, as Carolina was mentioning, there are this issue of how this data are used. But this is, I was in a panel yesterday on big data and development and privacy, and this is a big issue everywhere. It's not just only related to zero rating. This means that, of course, zero rating practice need to be compliant with the privacy law, because if the data are the customers, unless the customers accept to be zero rating, or there are a lot of rules that should be applied, that this would be against the law to some extent. Then there is the issue of the diversity of content. It's zero rating. It's to some extent is growing in a significant way. Then, when we come to the issue of adoption, we should really, as also Alper was saying before, we should consider. In terms of adoption, it's better not have access to internet because you are not interested, or try or not. In other words, nothing is better than having something. I don't know. Of course, for instance, the OECD was suggesting some counter rules, some effect to mitigate. This is an issue at stake, but definitely I think that we should go for this type of scheme and suggested adoption. Overall, we think that zero rating is an important mechanism to allow product differentiation with positive effect on social welfare. It's used by mobile network operator to enrich the attractiveness of their platform, and we don't consider it's in contrast with net neutrality rules in the majority of cases, of course. Now, again, we strongly suggest that the best approach is the one that the European Commission and also the FCC is suggesting, a case-by-case approach, because exactly I think we need to learn more about it, and we'll avoid the error that was mentioned in Alpe, in other words, for a close innovation, because again, we are in a different world, and this IT market needs innovation to grow and to allow to bring everywhere, the bounty of this technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Grazie, Lorenzo. In Italian. You have clearly showed that there are a lot of changes going on, and also in the internet, and so we need the flexibility, but at the same time, the telecoms operator, they want to use all the flexibility in the full respect of competition and of the rights on internet. Last but not the least, Professor Yu, he has been one of the protagonists of the debate along this Internet Governance Forum in João Pessoa, and he's a professor of law, so he can, a little bit give the final touch of this debate and on the first part of this debate and open the second part with your participation.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I should say that I'm not just a professor of law, like Hernan, I'm a professor of communication. I'm also a professor of engineering. And so one of the things that I like to do is to try to understand not only the legal implications, but also the economic and the technical implications. And what's fascinating to me is how prevalent zero rating has become. According to some published reports, it's estimated that 45% of all carriers do some form of zero rating. And it's clearly become an important part of the business practices in the industry. There are some documented interesting success stories. There's published reports that zero rating has increased subscribership in, say, Paraguay by 50% of the participation, and we see these numbers. And so we have a very rich story emerging, and what I really love about the way this particular panel is shaped up is we're focusing on real data. We're focusing on the ground and not zero rating as an abstract principle. What often flies below the radar is one of the first zero rating cases that came up was actually in the United States. In 2011, a very small wireless player named Metro PCS that had 3% of the market, it was, I believe, the number 7 or number 8 player competing against 4 national providers, offered free YouTube on an LTE platform that uses 1.4 megahertz of spectrum. So those people, if you follow this, the minimal offering amount of spectrum you need to do this is conceivably, traditionally is 20 megahertz. The preferred implementation is 40 megahertz. They did it on 1.4 megahertz. These people are heroes. They're taking minimal spectrum, using it creatively to compete effectively with large incumbent players. But they found that there were various technical limitations about their ability to do video simply because the platform they were using on their feature phone didn't support a great deal of other technologies. They were the subject of the first network neutrality complaint under the original 2010 order. It was never resolved because they were subsequently acquired by T-Mobile, and it was rendered moot. But it is a wonderful example about how small players can enter. In Chile, the case was brought against Virgin Mobile, which had a 1% market share on a zero rating plan they had with WhatsApp. The Slovenian case, again, was small players using relatively small cloud app services like Hanger Mappa. And these, in my opinion, if you have 1% market share or 3% market share, whatever you're doing to enhance your attractiveness to your consumers should be per se legal. At those levels, the chance that you're actually harming competition in the market or harming consumers is virtually non-existent. And what that tells me is that a contextual analysis is very, very important. We've been invited by our moderator to think about this in real policy terms. The traditional way we think about this is you have to analyze market structure. You have to analyze if you have small market share, it's generally unproblematic. If it's non-exclusive, it's generally unproblematic. You should look at the service that's being zero rated, and if they're extremely small market share, it should be unproblematic. And the chance of them hurting markets is very, very low. Now, Hernan and Ricardo have both emphasized a very important part, and which is there's a demand side to this problem, which all the evidence, there's great surveys, it's not just, it comes from developed world surveys by Ofcom and the FCC, developing world surveys in China and Brazil that shows that people, non-subscribers, 2/3 of them wouldn't take it if it were free. They don't see the value. And I hear many people say, well, they're just misguided. I started my career in business, actually, and there's a saying in business, the customer is always right. What they mean is there are many people who create a great product, and they say, customers should want my product. You can't say that. They do or they don't, and you take your customers as you find them. You have to find a way to appeal to them, not saying, well, they don't understand. The beautiful thing about zero rating is it is showing, as Hernan says, and Ricardo says, by showing a grandmother that you can talk to your kids through WhatsApp this way, they finally understand. And it's a way to operationalize and make it real for them. It's interesting, we often talk about different populations. In Denmark, there is a zero-rated app designed for senior citizens. And in an aging global population, we forget that senior citizens are among the least equipped to adopt digital technology, being left behind, and they need something different out of the phone. My mother, who's now 79 years old, wants devices which have one button, the on and the off button, and that's it. And there's a great deal of barriers that need to be overcome. There's some traditional personal barriers in terms of religion. The Islamic Mobile is coming out with zero-rated access to the Quran. It's a very specific implementation, but again, for a certain community that makes a great deal of sense. I would quibble with one thing about the original design of the internet. One of the interesting things, if you want to see I think the best article on that, there's a wonderful article by David Clark, who was the protocol architect in the 1980s, called The Design Philosophy of the DARPA Internet Protocols. And what you'll see is they list, they're mostly primarily functional things and about accounting for usage, and it has to be resilient against nodes, loss of nodes. It was you don't actually see and this was written in the 80s, more or less at the same time. You don't tend to see the emphasis that many people attribute to an end-to-end architect, well, to an open or a neutral architecture. The last big point, the point I want to make is, usually network neutrality is framed in terms of discrimination. And what people who've implemented discrimination have discovered, it's very hard. Well, what is discrimination? If someone's offering you a different product, you can charge different prices. So what you see is if products vary a great deal, it's very hard. The funny thing is, if it costs different amounts, you can also charge a different price. So if you're buying something and your shipping costs are higher than someone else's, you can charge them more because the real costs are more. And there's a deep irony here. If two people who have different shipping costs are charged the same price, an economist will also tell you that is discriminatory. So what's fascinating about the piece, the data presented by the OECD, is that for many of these services, the real costs are different. And for them to charge the same price and within the data plan, for them not to zero rate on peering, because it is in fact free, would be discrimination in the traditional sense. And in fact, what you're seeing, things like Netflix, they are hosting content at individual central offices, locally in cities. They don't buy general transit. And in fact, it is a different cost. Their costs are lower. And under a classic economic analysis, not dropping the price for the apps that in fact cost less to deliver would be discrimination. The other side Lorenzo alludes to is demand-side discrimination plays an important role here, often by new entrants, as Hernan says, as the dominant players here. If you are a small player, you see this with T-Mobile. They're the number 4 player in the US, and they don't have spectrum holdings that compete with Verizon and AT&T. They are the most aggressive about competing on services. If they can't compete on services, they'll have to compete on network quality and price. And that will favor the better established players with the strongest networks. They're attempting to compete on a new dimension, opening up a new dimension, which is by offering a specialized set of services appealing to a smaller group of people. And what we know about the internet, we've gone from this thing that was the plaything of academics to send email and initially to browse the web, to a global phenomenon used in a dazzling set of uses that's now mobile, much more diverse. If the market you're selling to becomes more diverse, you should expect providers of services and networks to diversify their offerings in response. And if you want to know the differences of people use it, look how your children use the internet and compare it to how anyone over 50 uses the internet. They bear no resemblance to each other. So I can see what we're learning is service-based differentiation can target senior citizens, youth, different people who use things. And if you look at your own usage, I suspect you use a handful of things very heavily. And if those things, it's quite possible that a down market player, a new entrant or a recent entrant, could use that strategy to target. Last thought about free speech. There are 2 theories of free speech. One treats it as an abstract principle of liberty. Another looks at free speech on the ground, which is not is it an abstract principle, but how meaningful are people's ability to exercise free speech, a practical application of it. And in fact, what you start to see is the zero rating has stimulated a great deal of political organizing through that, which they found it easier to do. And so what I would say from a pure free speech context, we should take a richer perspective than just looking at it as straight liberty. But it brings which focuses on what I hope you take away from this. We should focus not on abstract principles such as discrimination or free speech, but on users. How they use the internet, what they benefit from it. And that, in the end, is why we have things like the internet, not for some abstract purpose, but for real benefits for real people.
Thank you very much, Professor. You were so clear and in your conclusion that, I have not to comment at all. It's quite late, but the contribution were very, 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 very interesting. So I could not really stop our speaker so now it's time for you, short, but we can take, I think, 5 questions. And then, of course, we will go a little bit late. But, I try to find at least 5 questions. If you are short, we can do it. And then a short reply from our speakers. Okay, first, please qualify yourself and short question. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me? All right. I'm Mike Godwin. I'm with R Street Institute. I've actually been, I was the first lawyer for the Electronic Frontier Foundation 25 years ago. I've been working on free speech for a long time, but I also I was also the lawyer for Wikipedia. So that's sort of my introduction. I'm pro zero rating, pro freedom of speech. I'm in the abstract and on the ground. I actually am concerned with both. A specific question regarding Wikipedia Zero, the zero-rated version of Wikipedia. As many of you know, it's very difficult to learn how to write a Wikipedia article, to learn how to contribute to it, and it takes a lot of your data cap, if you are in a data-capped mobile-using country, to learn how to be an active contributor to Wikipedia. And the Wikimedia Foundation has done some of that by making the apps easier to contribute to. The question is, what policies make it possible for developing countries, developing minority populations and minority languages that lack infrastructure to get on the internet and contribute to their own culture through Wikipedia in their own language? What is your plan, or what is the best way to get to that result?
My name is Shad. Am I audible? My name is Sharda. I am a graduate student from India. My question is to Professor Galperin, if I've got the name right. On the data available on different mobile service offerings, I had a question. If you have collected this data over time, for providers providing zero-rated packs, is the cost of full bundles at any specific MB level comparatively greater than the market standard for that MB level of a full bundle data pack? And if that is so, is there a general trend across Latin America, or does this vary by market? And are there other factors that involve this pricing decision? If you have done any research on this, I'd be very interested to hear your data. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Flávia Lefebvre, from Brazilian Consumer Association. Among the various types of zero-rating plans with limited amount of data and applications, could you discuss a little bit on the difference between them and plans as free basics, considering the potential damage to the preservation of the competitive environment and no discriminatory access, human rights as freedom of expression and privacy? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Moji Marzoug. I'm working with Orange Group. Two questions. The first one, as you know, voice also is data, and mainly in mobile networks. Why it's specific only for data? Many issues that you have discussed. Because, for example, I'm engineer in mobile network, what the capacity that we didn't use for voice, we use it for data. In fact, the bandwidth we use both for data and for voice. Why the problem is only for data, and I remember that we have the same issue, what we call on-net traffic regarding in fact, competitivity and so. For example, on-net traffic, pricing, difference of pricing between on-net and off-net is the same problem. The second point is, in fact, there are another approach very similar to zero rating, is sponsored data. Why? nobody's ever, I attended yesterday, nobody has in fact discussed this approach, sponsored data without discrimination between service providers. Thank you.
Hello, I am Carolina Botero, Director of the Charisma Foundation, an NGO based in Colombia. My question, well, first, I like very much Verena's presentation and we'd like you to share it with us. But my question goes directly to Mr. Pedraza from the government of Colombia. As I was very surprised to see the presentation today because this is exactly the scope of the project that we thought was in Colombia since the first moment. However, we have been asking the government and we sent a FOIA request a few months ago on the scope of Facebook, of Internet.org project, and specifically asking whether there were previous analyses on what the population was going to be covered, what were the goals that this project will have vis-a-vis the Vive Digital project and so forth and so on. And there's a very long FOIA request where the government basically answered to all our questions. This is basically a private project. Internet.org is a private project. There are no goals that the government can relate to this project vis-a-vis the Vive Digital project. And in any of the other questions, the answer was more or less the same. This is a private project. We have no. So okay. My question is, you are mentioning today 40%. We have asked Facebook, they said they have no data on these two. Where do we have the 40% from? And you have done a very good connection between the Colombian policy and Internet.org. How did this change from August, our answer, and today?
Okay, we start from Mrs. One more question. You are, yeah, okay. I didn't see.
Hello, my name is Carlos Brito from Mexico. I have a question on digital media, for example. For some digital media, zero rating may seem like an entry barrier that may cost readers for some of them. For example, in Mexico, actually, we have it's not Movistar, the most aggressive on zero rating. Actually, Telcel, Carlos Slim Telcel, is very, very aggressive on it as well. And we have also Televisa, for example, who is a broadcasting, is very concentrated in Mexico, broadcasting services as well as telecommunications. And Televisa is starting to be an ISP, and even mobile ISP, soon in the future. And what happens then when you have these zero rating services, when you start to zero rating your own news services, you shape or you push the readers to your own content. So the other media in Mexico, especially digital media, who is the freest of all the media, because as I said, broadcasting and printed media are extremely concentrated. What happens with them? Because they now have an entry barrier for readers, for Mexican readers, because the ISP and broadcasting are the same company, because there's vertical integration. So from an economic point of view, that will be a problem for them, and of course will be a problem for the readers at some point, because the readers will be pushed, as I said, to the ISP and broadcasting corporation.
Okay, good. Very interesting question. We start from Carolina.
Yes.
On freedom of expression. It was a very interesting question on touching.
Yes, many of the questions were addressed to particular participants more than so. Yes, I understand the zero rating programs in terms of producing this kind of fostering the demand and taste and for users that would otherwise find it very difficult to access the internet. But it's just to think about the future. I mean, in Latin America, we are extremely concerned, and not only civil society or academics. I mean, governments are extremely concerned about the extreme concentration of the industry, or what we call the internet industry in general. So if we are still focusing on talking about people who need access to the internet, the next billion, and talking about them as just simple users, and what will happen to these people in the future if we are still thinking about users and not people who can actually produce more in the internet. So I really like the idea of zero rating as a tasting platform for new users that are yet to come, but I would also like to think about the next billion users as more producers on the internet. Thank you.
Ricardo?
Thank you.
You had the Colombian question.
Well, yeah. I would like also to address a little bit the one that was stated about how to facilitate the enrichment of Wikipedia by minorities. I think that for the government it's really clear that regarding the priorities, the first thing is to try to reach these minorities. And that's Vive Plan has been doing, reaching the different minorities. And the second step is to help them, to educate them. Just by reaching and just by connecting is not enough, and we are clear all about it. So what the government has been setting in place through the countries are places where these minorities can take some learning and some training that will help them to provide some input for the future. And it's aligned with Carolina have said that it's not just connecting users, it's to help them to become more productive, to improve their lives. So that's the second part, and it's part of the Colombian digital plan that I have shared with you. Regarding the second question of what I shared regarding internet.org, well, the government hasn't changed its answer. Internet.org is a private initiative that was established by the sector, the private sector, the telecom sector in Colombia. Fortunately, the Colombian market has many operators, and these kind of initiatives are open to any of these operators. Specifically regarding the source of information of the zero ratings results, that was shared publicly on the main session on Wednesday on policy options for reaching the next billion. So Facebook said that when they review the results over the 29 countries of how these zero rating programs have been deployed, they shared that 50% of all the people that were engaged in these zero rating plans, after 30 days, it adopts some kind of internet plan. So that's the source. I asked at the end of the panel, at that main session, the panelist, and he just shared with me the data for Colombia. Thank you so much.
Verena?
Which one do you want me to address?
Yeah.
Mexican one?
Yeah. The Mexican one.
Okay, so I'm trying to address the Mexican one. And yeah, indeed, I agree, you have a point. So at the OECD a couple of years ago, we did a study on the telco market and a bit of media market in Mexico, and we clearly found that like the biggest concern that was there at the moment, what was there at the time and still is that there's a lack of competition in the telecommunication market. So our view is that this would be the priority, what needs to be addressed. There is one recent development which might be interesting and might change the dynamics a bit, is that Mexico is currently planning on creating a wholesale mobile network. I think it's Red Compartida, looking to my colleague who's a specialist in this, yes. So this could actually enable new opportunities, you know, to improve like the access in this area. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Hernan, you have your question to reply. Specific question addressed to you.
Yes, I think I was asked two questions. One is comparing pricing data. We're working on comparing with our pricing data, and I encourage everybody to do it. It's all available in our website. It's not as easy sometimes when you want to make sure you compare orange with orange when you compare zero-rated packages with non-zero-rated packages, so that are somewhat similar, so it's hard, but we're working on that, and I encourage anybody to to look at our data, it's online. And I think I was asked a gender question, and yes, there is a gender gap in Latin America in terms of internet use. It varies from 8 to 10%, sometimes 15% depending on the country when you control for all the other variables. So there's definitely still a gender gap in the region.
Okay. Lorenzo, what?
Well, I agree with Mongi. I mean, I mentioned that I think the sponsor data arrangement has no exclusivity, and so cannot be considered anti-competitive, and so something can be promoted. Yeah.
So quickly, in response to Mike Godwin's question, I think this is a great point. I mean, there's a wonderful story about a zero rating app where a student applied for a fellowship in the US from Ghana and successfully obtained it. And the reason he did it is writing a fellowship application online takes a long time. He had a data plan. It just would have eaten up a lot of his resources to do it. And so there are wonderful emerging stories about how people are able to use that to benefit. Regarding the historical divisions, it's interesting. It's an artifact of history. I would say most users don't really know that SMS is not data, and they don't really care. And what we have is a historical division where one is carried in a certain way, and it's architected in a very different way with an openness. It's going to be treated in a certain way, but what we're seeing is an increasing convergence. For example, in cable television, that's all going to IP-based distribution, and they're going to allocate bandwidth to that, and in fact, what we're seeing is true convergence, which we've been talking about and predicting for 20 years. And this is going to put a lot of challenge on the categories we've historically used. Regarding a couple comments about impacting competitive environment, the important thing is one of the classic warnings about competition policy. You have to protect competition, not competitors. And often they're the same thing, but sometimes they're not. And we have to look at whether there's a real impact on users. So, for example, if a restaurant went out of business, it's bad for a competitor. But ultimately, there's so many restaurants, it's ultimately not going to hurt competition. You worry about structural problems, and in fact, there's other side benefits about stimulating build-out where you have to fold all of them into the analysis and look at the net effect to fully understand what the impact for competition is. And that's classic competition policy, but it's very hard to do sometimes.
Okay. I think that we can conclude our workshop. It was very interesting, and I think we have a lot of lessons to be drawn by the different speakers, and also from your very, very interesting questions. I think Verena will prepare a report on that on this workshop as a rapporteur, and will provide it to all of us in the next days. From my part, I think, from my side, I think that there is a clear message from this workshop. This is still, there is still a lot of work to do to understand the impact of zero rating, because markets are different, regulations are different, and so we have to be much careful, and when we take a very strong position for the moment, very tough position, so we have to give the possibility to open a certain flexibility, and the case-by-case approach, which in several regions of the national regulatory authorities are called to apply in order to understand if zero rating is respecting or promoting interest of consumers is crucial. And I think that next year, maybe in the next IGF, we will continue to discuss about zero rating. It will not be today the last day we talk about zero rating in this crucial context.
Thank you.
Of course, thanks to all of you for your patience and the attendance still, but sorry, at the beginning I had a problem with technology, and then it was.
No problem.
I know.